Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I am Mr. Kadim Khan and I am a lecturer in the Institute of Computing, Kuwait University of Science and Technology. Today we will take lecture number 22 of the subject of visual programming, in which we are going to discuss the exception handling in C#.NET. Dear student, exception handling is a special technique which is used for stopping the program to be crashed. It in fact resolves the runtime's errors or exceptions that are occurring. So in this lecture, we are going to discuss different exception handling and their techniques in the C#.NET. This is the discussion agenda. It contains the topics of exceptions. Here we will discuss the real definitions of the exceptions. Then we have the exceptions in the .NET framework. Then we have different types of exception in the .NET framework. And then we have the syntax of exception handling in C#.NET. And here we will discuss try-catch programming constructs. And then we will discuss multiple types of exceptions here: array index out of bound exception, format exception, divide by zero exception, and stack overflow exception will be discussed. And also we will discuss rethrowing in exceptions. And at the end we will discuss the finally clause of the exception handling. Dear students, exception, as its name indicates, it is the notification that something interrupts the normal program execution. By the normal program execution means that when the compiler compiles and runs the programs and the user provides some input output, and if there are certain errors that are occurring at the runtimes, then these errors are called exceptions. So the exceptions are in fact the certain states in which the program is interrupted. And when the exception is occurring, then the state of that program is saved. That means that the normal flow is interrupted and the control is passed to the exception handler. So the exception handler resolves and the exceptions. And if there are certain errors, then the exception handler throws the error message. So for example, if you want to open a file, but that file is not existing in the particular directory, so then the program which is responsible for opening that files will detect this exception, and the CLR, which is the Common Language Runtime Routine, which is in the .NET framework, that CLR will throw the exception with the error message. Now in the .NET framework, the exception is in the .NET and is in the object. So the objects contain multiple types of the exceptions. So these are certain signals or errors when the particular events is occurred, and that cannot be anticipated in the normal program flow. That means that these programs cannot be in fact compiled and executed in the normal fashion as like the other programs when they have no exceptions. So when such unusual events takes place, then the exception method throws the special object which contains information about the different types of the errors. The errors is in fact traced in the program where that program contains certain errors, and then these errors in fact displayed on the screens, which contains different information about the exceptions. So when the exception is in the .NET, which contains the so-called the stack trace exceptions, the stack trace is the certain error message which contains all sort of the exceptions, which gives us the information about exactly the error has been occurred. Now in the .NET frameworks, the exception is in fact traced in a certain fashion. For example, first the .NET CLR execute the program. So after executing, the main function has been executed. So first of all, the execution starts from the main function. Now in the main function, there may contain different modules. The modules may be different function. For example, module 1, module 2, and up to different module n. So in the main functions, the first module is called or executed. Then the second module is executed and the third module is executed. And then the exceptions are thrown. When the exception is thrown, then the last one module is in fact used to find out the exceptions. So in the last module, first the exception has been in fact captured. if there is certain exception, and then the next after the last module, that is in fact, and then the first module is in fact executed at last for the exception handling, and then at the end the main function is in fact handled for the exceptions. And when all the exceptions are collected, that these all exceptions are in fact provided to the .NET CLR, while CLR is Common Language Runtime Routine. So here the CLR is responsible for throwing the exceptions, and then the .NET CLR, which is the Common Language Runtime Routine, that CLR displays the runtime errors in the form of a certain error message like this one, that is provided with the error icon and the body of the error message. And there is the quit, ignore, and the cancel statements there. So if the users ignore, then it means that the program execution is continued. And if the user quit, that means that the program is quit or exited. So that means that the last one routine is first executed for handling the exception, and then so on up to the first routine. These are different types of exceptions that are occurring in the Visual C# that are in the .NET framework. Remember that these exceptions are commons for all the .NET languages. The exceptions are handled, or they are in fact inherited from the object class, which is the top level class. And exception is the child or the subclass of the object class. And exception class contains two further child classes, system exception and application exception. So systems are those exceptions that are because of certain error messages or certain problems in the code. And application exception are those exceptions which occurs due to the product or due to the application product. So system are in fact built-in exceptions, while application are generalized exceptions. Now in the system exception, there is external exception, which means that the exception occurs from the external file that is used by the program. For example, comp exceptions are those exceptions which occurs due to the component object model exceptions. And component object models are the comp components which are in fact, if we use the comp components in our program and that comp components are raising the exception, that means that these comp components are responsible for the exception, and these are due to the external components in our program. So that's why these are called the external exceptions. Now system exception also contains the aggregate exception. Aggregate exception are those exceptions which are in fact of the many types, and they are because of the aggregates. These are the aggregates, means that these are the collection of multiple exceptions. They cannot be one single exception, and these can be multiple exceptions, and that's why these are called the aggregate exception. Then we have the argument exceptions. The argument exception are those exceptions which are because of the argument. So argument may be certain parameter list. Here are two types of argument exception: argument null exception and argument out of range exception. Argument null exception means that if, for example, there is a function which takes 2 or 3 parameters and anyone is missing, that is, then the argument null exception will be raised. For example, if there is the power function, well, the power function requires 2 parameters and 1 parameter or both of the parameters are missing, then the power function will raise the argument null exceptions. And the second exception of the argument exception is called the argument out of range exception. In the argument out of range exception, if certain range is out of for the certain parameters, then that is called argument out of range exceptions. So here, for example, if there is certain integer variable and we are providing longer range of the values than the integer parameters, then the argument out of range exception will be raised here. Next exception is called divide by zero exception. This exception is mostly occurring. So in the divide by zero exception, if you divide any value by the zero, then the divide by zero exception will be occur, because any value cannot be divided by 0. So that is the divide by 0 exception. Next one is null reference exception. If we provide the null reference of a certain values, then that null reference exception will rise. For example, if we are providing the null reference of the arrays, then the null reference exception will be thrown here. Another one is called overflow exception. If we are going toward the overflow of the arrays, then the overflow exception will be raised here. For example, if we have the array of 100 elements and we are storing the 105th element in the arrays, then the overflow exception will be raised here. Now this is the syntax of the exception handling. In the syntax of exception handling, first we have the try statement, then we have multiple catch statement. That can be only one catch statement or can be multiple catch statements. In any one of the catch statement, we have a throw statement as well. The throw statement means that well must throw the exception. That means that if exception arises and that is catched here, then the throw statement means that the exception should also be thrown here. And last one is the final statement. In the final statement, here we want to eliminate our, for example, if we want to release certain resources, then the finally block will be executed. First of all, the try statement is executed. In the try statement, the program tries over the code. So for example, if we want to store certain values in the arrays, the try statement will in fact contain that particular statements. And if there are certain errors that are in fact occurring in the try statement, that will be cached here. There may be one or multiple catch statement. For example, first catch statement should be invalid operational exception. This is one sort of the exception. For example, if there is some invalid operation, for example, we cannot subtract one string from another, then invalid operation exception will arise here. Some other exception we can also provide another exception as well here, and we can also leave the exceptions function empty. For example, if we do not provide this statement here, that can also be possible. And the throw statement means that the exception will be rethrow here, and the final statement is used to deallocate the resources. For example, this will clean up any operation that has been started within this try catch statement, and that try finally clocks will always be executed. This is the try catch programming constructor as well. Here we can see this is the try statement. There we have two catch statements. So in the try statement, we will write certain codes which may contain the exception, while in the catch statement we will in fact here write a program for the catch that the exception will be catched here. And here we will provide the certain exception mechanisms here that will be used to handle the exceptions. This is the examples which in fact throw the index out of range exceptions, and that is unhandled. So for example, you can see that this is the public stated void main string args function. This is the void main function which is in the programming statement. There must be contained at least one function which is called void main. Here is the array int a is equal to new int 1000. That means that it is the a is the array of integer class. So that means integer is the data type of the array, and there are 1000 values in this particular array. Now we are providing values to this arrays, that is we are assigning values. So we are using here the loop. Loop is starting from 0 to 9. In fact, 1 value is less than 5000. That is I is less than 5000, which is 4999. But the size of the array is thousands, while we are storing more values than the size of arrays. So that's why the exception will be in fact thrown here. So that means that index out of range exception is thrown here. That means that here the index is out of the range of this array, which is 1000, and we are storing more than values than the thousands. So this exception will occur at runtime. Now we can in fact write the code for here. That you can see that this code is again here, which contains the the exceptions. Now, to handle this exception, we will use the try-catch statement. Here you can see this is the array of thousands element of the integer data types A, and here's the try-catch statement. In the try statement, we will perform certain codings where the exception may occur for int I is equal to 0, and here it is the infinite loop and I plus plus. So that means this is the infinite loop because here is no conditions. So ai is equal to I, that means we are assigning the counter variable of a for loop to the arrays. So first time 0 will be assigned 2, 3, 4 up to so on. So when the value will become 1000, then the exception will be thrown here. So the exception will be index out of range exception E, and console.writeLines, it will print the exception E dot to strings. E contains the exception of index out of range here. That exception will be in fact thrown here. Next is format exception and divide by zero exception. Here we will discuss two different types of exception. One is called the format exception and second one is called divide by zero exception. Now, for example, this program takes two variables from the keyboard and then divide first value perform the division of the first value over the second number. So first of all, the string will be printed here, enter any two numbers, and this program will be this code will be the part of the try statement. Here the computer will try here, enter any two numbers, console.writeLines. So two number will be entered here. Int number 1 is equal to int.parse console.readline. So here the program will be in fact take the input from the keyboard, and that input will be typecasted into integer, and that will be then assigned to the integer number 1. Then again int.parse console.readline, that will take second input from the keyboard, and that input will be typecast into integer, and it will be assigned to int number 2. Int number 3 is equal to number 1 divided by number 2. Here the division will be performed and the value will be stored in the number 3 variable. Now we want to display this result, so console.writeLine division is equal to concatenation of variable number 3. So this strings will be concatenated here, and this whole strings will be printed on the screen using the console. So console.writeLine will display this output. Now if there is certain errors that is because of the division here, for that is the divide by 0 or number format both. So catch format exception will be used for formatting. For example, if we provide any one of the two values non-integer, for example ABC or characters, certain alphabetical characters, then the format exception will be called here. So catch format exception E console. You must enter two integer plus invalid number format. So because one of the two or both true, or if non-integer, then this statement will be printed that you must need to enter two integers, that is invalid numbers. Secondly, catch divide by 0 exception E console.writeLine, second number cannot be 0 plus invalid divisor. If the second number, that is the divisor here, becomes 0, or if the user is in fact typing 0 here or providing 0, then the divide by 0 exception will be raised here. Console.writeLine, second number cannot be 0 here, and invalid divisor, these two strings will be concatenated with each other, and these two strings will be printed on the console. Another type of exception is called stack overflow exception. In the stack overflow exception, if we are in fact calling the overflow, then the stack overflow exception will be called here. So for example, if we are calling this recursive function again and again, then stack overflow action will be here. So recursive catch stack overflow exception console, and the cursor is CLR is out of stack trace. That means that recursive function is that function which is in fact called again and again, and at the end the CLR, that is common language runtimes, is will be out of stack space. That means that our memory will be in fact out of range. So that means that our completely memory will be exhausted here, and CLR will print this message. And this is the function which we have declared here. So that means that a function is calling itself. So that means when this function will call, it will call its body. While that body contains only calling of this function. That means this the empty function which will be called so many times here. And when the memory will be overflowed, so then the stack overflow exception will be raised here, and this message will be printed on the screen. Rethrowing an exception. Sometimes we want that exception within the method will be rethrow. That means it will be throw again. So when it will occur. So still we need to signal the program that the execution has been occurred. In this case, we write the rethrow of the exception here. For example, if we still want to rethrow the exception, then we will use the rethrow. For example, this is the try catch statements, and here in the try we have certain codes here, while in the catch there is the arithmetic exception AE. Then the AE will be in fact the exception here, and here we have in fact used the throw statement, throw AE. It will rethrow the exception. That means that exception will occur, and then the exception will be handled, but it will also be thrown here. So that means that exception will be thrown here again. So that means that if we need some information about the exception, then we throw the exception here. This is the example of the rethrowing exceptions. For example, here is the catch terminal format exception E. You must enter two integer and invalid numbers, then catch divide by 0 E, console.write line, second number cannot be 0 or invalid divisor, then throw E. That means that here the exception will be thrown again here. So this is the output 10 0, second number cannot be 0 invalid divisor. This is the statement which is printed by this catch statement. So second number cannot be 0 invalid divisor. And throw E is responsible for throwing this exception. While if we comment this statement, then these 4 lines will not be appeared. These 4 lines is in fact appeared by, in fact these are printed by through E. So that means rethrowing the exceptions, even the exception is handled here. And the finally class is a certain class which is finally executed. In the most statement, we do not provide the finally class, but in the finally class is used for to avoid the resource leaking. So for example, in the program which contains the finally class, and it contains certain types of resources. For example, these resources must be in fact returned. So that's why we will use the finally class. While in C++, most common resource leakage is memory leakage. For example, if you want to release the memory, we use the finally class here. While in the Java, automatic garbage collection is in fact used by the garbage collectors. So automatic garbage collection is performed in Java. But in the C#, the resource leakage can occur in the C# as well. For example, if you want to use the files, a database connection or the network connection that might not be available for use in that program, then we use the finally statement to release all these connections and all these database files. So the final blocks appears after the cache blocks, that is, it appears at the end of the full programs, and it must always execute. That means that final class is always being executed, even if we don't want to execute the final blocks, and if there is the final block, that will be executed. So it is used to release different resources because it in fact provides us the memory, or that the memory leakage should not be happen here. Then the final block releases the memory. Now here is the example. For example, this is the string variable first name. This is another string variable age text. This is in fact age. Age is the integer variable console.write. Enter your first name. So the key from this will be the statement which will be printed on the screen to guide the user that please enter your first names here. And console.read lines first name. First name is the string variable we have in fact declare here. So from the keyboard the user will enter that first name. Console.enter your age. when the user will provide the age here, console read lines. So here the age will be provided through the keyboard and it will be stored to the age text in the format of the strings. Then try age is equal in that first age. Here the age will be typecasted into integer and then it will be assigned to the age integer variable here which we have declared here. So age is equal to in that first age text. Then console.write hi, you are months old. So this will convert the year into the months. So hi here is the empty parameters which represents that the parameters here first name will be stored here in the zero parameter list. Here you are, and the second parameter will be in fact printed here at this position months old. So hi you are these months old. So here first name will be printed here. For example, hi Ali, you are, for example, 24 months old if the age is 2 years, 2 multiplied 12. So and the finally clause is must executed console.writeline goodbye comma first name. So that means the first name which is the Ali will be printed here on this parameter list. So it will says goodbye to Ali. Dear student, this is the end of this lectures. If you want to read more about these topics, there are 2 books. So you can study these books for your further reading and study. And if you have any questions, you can ask that questions through the email. My email is m.kadeem@cusp.edu.pkl. I will wait for your questions and I will respond and answer your question immediately if I get them. Thank you very much.